They held a funeral for me while I was still alive. I watched from across the street as strangers mourned at my graveside, but my own son and his mistress were nowhere to be found. What I discovered next made me do something that would haunt them forever. I'm glad you're here with me. Stay until the end and comment what country you're watching from so I can see how far this story reaches. At 70 years old, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. My name is Dorothy Pemberton, and I've lived a full life in the quiet lakeside town of Birchwood Falls, Minnesota. I'd buried my beloved husband Robert 32 years ago, raised my only son Nathaniel through good times and bad, survived breast cancer twice, built a successful career as a librarian, and finally retired to my modest but comfortable cottage on Willowbrook Lane. The house wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms, a cozy kitchen with yellow curtains I'd sewn myself, and a garden where I grew tomatoes and roses. But it was mine, paid off after decades of careful saving. But nothing in my 70 years could have prepared me for what happened on a cold Tuesday morning in early March. I'd been staying with my son Nathaniel and his wife Penelope for 3 weeks while recovering from a minor surgery on my left knee. Nothing serious, the doctor had assured me, just a routine arthroscopic procedure to repair some cartilage damage from years of gardening and long walks around Birchwood Lake. The surgery itself had gone smoothly, but the recovery meant I couldn't climb stairs safely, and my little cottage had a steep staircase leading to the bedroom. My doctor had been firm, no stairs for at least 4 weeks, and I'd need someone nearby in case of complications. When Nathaniel heard about my predicament, he'd called me immediately, his voice warm and reassuring over the phone. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I'd been sitting in my kitchen, worrying about how I'd manage on my own. "Mom, absolutely not," he'd said when I'd suggested I could manage by sleeping on the couch. "You're not spending a month on that lumpy old sofa. Penelope and I have plenty of room here. We've got that entire guest suite downstairs, bedroom, bathroom, everything on one level. You won't have to climb a single stair." "Nathaniel, I don't want to impose," I'd protested weakly, already feeling the relief wash over me. "You and Penelope have your own lives. I know how busy you both are." "Mom, stop. Penelope would love to have you here. You know how much she adores your company. Plus, she's been working from home lately with her real estate business, so she'll be around if you need anything during the day while I'm at the firm." That should have been my first warning sign, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Penelope had never adored my company. In the 8 years since she'd married my son, she'd been polite but distinctly distant, always finding reasons why they couldn't visit for Thanksgiving, always too swamped with property showings to attend my birthday dinners, always conveniently scheduled for spa weekends when I invited them to Sunday brunch. I'd tried not to take it personally. Some people just weren't close with their in-laws, and that was okay. Nathaniel loved her, and she made him happy, or at least, I'd thought she did. That was enough for me. I'd learned long ago that you couldn't force relationships, that love came in different shapes and sizes, and that sometimes the best thing you could do was give people space and accept whatever affection they were willing to offer. But something in Nathaniel's voice that day had made me push my doubts aside. He sounded genuinely concerned, genuinely eager to help. He was my son, my baby boy who'd once brought me dandelions picked from the neighbor's yard and called them the most beautiful flowers in the world. How could I refuse? So I'd agreed, and the following Monday, Nathaniel had picked me up in his sleek silver BMW and driven me to their house in Lakeside Estates, the most exclusive neighborhood in Birchwood Falls. Their home was a sprawling modern construction with floor-to-ceiling windows, a 3-car garage, and a lawn so perfectly manicured it looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. The guest suite was indeed on the ground floor, tastefully decorated with cream walls, expensive-looking abstract paintings, and furniture that probably cost more than everything in my entire cottage combined. There was a king-sized bed with more pillows than any human could possibly need, a private bathroom with heated floors and a rainfall shower, and French doors that opened onto a small patio overlooking their koi pond. "This is beautiful," I'd said honestly, running my hand over the soft duvet. "Thank you, Nathaniel. Both of you." Penelope had appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, wearing yoga pants and a designer athletic top that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She was beautiful in that carefully maintained way that required personal trainers, expensive salons, and a skincare routine I couldn't begin to understand. "Of course, Dorothy," she'd said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're family. Make yourself at home." But even as she said it, I'd noticed the way her gaze flickered around the room, as if she were mentally calculating how long this intrusion into her perfectly ordered life would last. The first week passed uneventfully enough. I woke each morning around 7, made my way carefully to the kitchen where I'd prepare a simple breakfast, then spend my days reading in the sunroom or working on the knitting project I'd brought, a blanket for the church charity drive. Penelope would emerge from her home office occasionally, offering polite inquiries about my knee and my comfort, but otherwise keeping to herself. Nathaniel would come home around 6, have dinner with us, then retreat to his study to work on cases. He was a corporate attorney at Morrison & Chandler, one of the most prestigious firms in the state. I tried to be as unobtrusive as possible, cleaning up after myself immediately, keeping my belongings confined to the guest suite, declining their offers to include me in their evening plans. I was a temporary guest, an inconvenience necessitated by medical circumstances, and I was determined not to overstay my welcome or disrupt their lives more than absolutely necessary. But on the morning everything changed. That cold Tuesday in March, I woke earlier than usual, around 6:30. My knee had been aching during the night, and I'd slept poorly, tossing and turning as I tried to find a comfortable position. I decided to get up and take one of my pain medications, then perhaps make myself some tea and watch the sunrise over the koi pond. As I made my way slowly down the hallway, using the wall for support, I'd left my cane in the guest room and didn't want to go back for it. I heard voices coming from the direction of the master bedroom. The house was designed with the master suite at the opposite end from the guest quarters, separated by the main living areas, but sound carried strangely in these modern open-plan designs. At first, I thought Nathaniel and Penelope were just having an early morning conversation. But as I got closer to the kitchen, which shared a wall with their bedroom, I realized the voices were urgent, hushed in that particular way that people use when they're trying not to be overheard but emotion keeps forcing the volume higher. "We can't keep doing this, Nathaniel. Your mother is literally right down the hall." It was a woman's voice, but it wasn't Penelope's. I'd know my daughter-in-law's voice anywhere, crisp, controlled, with that slight mid-Atlantic accent she'd cultivated despite growing up in rural Wisconsin. This voice was different. Younger, breathier, with an undertone of frustration and something else I couldn't quite identify. Intimacy, perhaps. The kind of familiarity that came from countless private conversations. I froze mid-step, my hand pressed against the wall to keep from falling. My heart had started pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. "Vanessa, please. Just give me a few more weeks. Once Mom's back in her own place, we can figure this out properly. I promise." Vanessa. The name hit me like a physical blow. I knew that name. Vanessa Thorne was Nathaniel's business associate, a 35-year-old marketing consultant he'd been working with for the past 2 years. She ran her own firm, Thorne Creative Solutions, and Nathaniel's law firm had hired her to help rebrand their image and attract younger, wealthier clients. He'd mentioned her dozens of times over the past 2 years, always in the context of work, always praising her innovative ideas and strategic thinking. I'd even met her once, at a firm holiday party 18 months ago. She'd been striking, tall and elegant with auburn hair and the kind of confidence that came from success achieved young. She'd shaken my hand, smiled warmly, and told me how wonderful it was to finally meet Nathaniel's mother, how he spoke of me so fondly. I'd liked her immediately, had even mentioned to Nathaniel afterward how professional and charming she seemed. Now, standing in his hallway at 6:30 in the morning, I was hearing her voice coming from his bedroom while his wife was supposedly on a business trip in Minneapolis. Wait. Was Penelope even in Minneapolis? Or was that a lie? A few more weeks? Vanessa's voice rose slightly, losing some of that careful control. "You've been saying that for 6 months, Nathaniel. 6 months of sneaking around, of carefully scheduled meetings that are really just excuses to see each other, of me sitting alone in restaurants while you cancel plans because Penelope got suspicious or your mother needed something. When are you going to tell her the truth? When are you going to tell your mother what's really going on? Keep your voice down. Nathaniel hissed, and I could hear the panic edging into his tone. I will, okay? I promise I will. But Claire's been watching me like a hawk lately. She's suspicious about the credit card bills, the late nights. And with Mom being here, everything is just more complicated. If I upset Mom now, while she's recovering, she could have complications. The stress could. Oh, please, Vanessa cut him off, and now her voice was sharp with sarcasm. Don't pretend this is about your mother's health. This is about money, Nathaniel. It's always been about money. You don't want to rock the boat until you've secured your inheritance. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood frozen, barely breathing, my knees screaming in protest at my awkward position, but I couldn't move, couldn't even think about moving. That's not fair, Nathaniel said finally, his voice low and dangerous. You know it's more complicated than that. Do I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty simple. You won't leave Penelope because she brings in too much money with her real estate business, and you're tied up in joint investments. You won't be honest with your mother because she has a life insurance policy and a house that you want to inherit without any drama. So instead, you keep everyone in the dark and expect me to just wait patiently while you figure out how to have your cake and eat it too. Vanessa. I love you, Nathaniel. I do. But I'm 35 years old, and I'm tired of being someone's secret. Either you commit to this, to us, or I'm done. I mean it this time. I couldn't listen anymore. My head was spinning, my knee was throbbing, and I felt like I might actually vomit right there in the hallway. As quietly as I could, I turned and made my painful way back to the guest suite, my hand pressed against the wall for support, my breathing shallow and controlled even though I wanted to gasp, to cry out, to scream. Once inside, I closed the door with shaking hands and sank onto the edge of the bed. The morning light was just beginning to filter through the French doors, painting everything in soft grays and golds, but I barely saw it. My son was having an affair. Nathaniel, my baby boy, the child I'd raised alone after Robert died, the man I'd been so proud of when he graduated law school, when he made partner at his firm, when he'd stood at the altar and promised to love and cherish Penelope for the rest of his life, that man was having an affair. And worse, far worse, he was talking about my death like it was a financial planning consideration. My inheritance. My life insurance policy. As if I were already gone, as if my value as a human being, as his mother, could be reduced to assets waiting to be claimed. I pressed my hands against my face, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to overwhelm me. I'd lost my husband 32 years ago, had raised Nathaniel alone through scraped knees and teenage rebellions and college applications, had worked 2 jobs to make sure he could go to law school without drowning in debt, had been so proud when he'd built this successful life for himself. And this was what it came to? A son who saw his elderly mother as an inconvenient obstacle to his affair, whose first concern wasn't my health or happiness but how quickly he could secure his inheritance. For the next 3 days, I existed in a fog of shock and grief. I pretended everything was normal because I didn't know what else to do. I smiled at breakfast, thanked Nathaniel and Penelope, who had apparently never left town at all, for their hospitality, and watched my son like he was a stranger wearing my child's face. He seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone, making excuses to leave the house for client meetings that I now knew were probably rendezvous with Vanessa. He'd kiss Penelope absently on the cheek before leaving, promise to be home for dinner, then send a text an hour later saying something had come up at the firm. Penelope seemed either oblivious or incredibly good at pretending. She maintained her routine with military precision: 6 a.m. yoga in the home gym, green smoothie while checking emails, conference calls in her home office, afternoon showings of luxury properties, evening wine while scrolling through listings on her iPad. She was pleasant to me in that distant, detached way she'd always been, asking about my knee, offering to pick up anything I needed from the pharmacy, but never engaging in actual conversation. I started to wonder if she knew. If perhaps she'd made the same calculation Nathaniel had, that their intertwined financial lives were worth more than emotional honesty, that appearances mattered more than truth. On Friday evening, the 4th day after my awful discovery, I was sitting in the living room pretending to read a mystery novel while actually replaying every conversation I'd had with Nathaniel over the past few years, looking for signs I'd missed. Penelope and Nathaniel were in the kitchen, and their voices carried clearly into the living room. They thought I was napping. I'd developed a habit of closing my eyes in the afternoon, and they'd apparently decided this meant I was asleep and deaf. "Your mother needs to leave, Nathaniel." Penelope's voice was sharp, stripped of all pretense of pleasantness. "I've been patient, I've been accommodating, but I'm done. I'm tired of walking on eggshells in my own home." "She's recovering from surgery, Penelope. What do you want me to do, throw her out on the street? I want my life back. I want to come home without finding her knitting projects all over the sunroom. I want to have conversations in my own kitchen without worrying that she's listening from the next room. I want to use my guest suite for actual guests, you know, people I've invited, not for your mother who honestly should have just hired a nurse and stayed in her own house." The cruelty of it took my breath away. I gripped the novel so tightly my knuckles went white, but I kept my eyes closed, my breathing even, playing the role of the sleeping old woman too deaf and drowsy to hear her daughter-in-law's contempt. "Fine," Nathaniel said, and his voice was cold, distant. "I'll tell her tomorrow that it's time to go back home. We can hire a visiting nurse to check on her, help with meals and medications." "Thank you," Penelope said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "I know it's difficult, but honestly, Nathaniel, we have our own lives to live. Your mother made her choices, and we shouldn't have to sacrifice our comfort for her poor planning." Poor planning. As if having surgery was a choice, as if growing old was a moral failing, as if 32 years of single parenthood and sacrifice meant nothing when weighed against their inconvenience. I sat there in that living room, eyes closed, tears silently streaming down my face, and felt something fundamental break inside me. Not my heart, that had already broken when I'd heard Nathaniel discuss my death as a financial opportunity. This was something deeper, something more essential. It was the breaking of the last thread that connected me to the belief that family meant something, that blood created bonds that mattered, that love could overcome selfishness and greed. That night, I barely slept. I lay in the expensive bed in their guest suite, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me, and tried to figure out what to do. Should I confront Nathaniel about the affair? About what I'd overheard? Should I leave quietly, preserve what little dignity I had left? Should I tell Penelope what her husband was doing? By Saturday morning, I'd made a decision. I would leave, but not because they wanted me to. I would leave because I needed distance, needed space to think and process and figure out how to move forward with this new understanding of who my son really was. I'd go back to my cottage on Willowbrook Lane, hire a nurse if I needed one, and start rebuilding the walls around my heart that I'd foolishly let down. I woke early, around 6 a.m., and began carefully packing my suitcase. My knee was feeling better, not perfect, but manageable with my cane and pain medication. I could handle stairs if I was careful. I could handle being alone. I'd been alone before, after Robert died, and I'd survived. I'd survive this too. I was folding my clothes and placing them carefully in my suitcase when I heard the doorbell ring downstairs. It was an odd time for visitors, barely 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning. I heard footsteps, heard the front door open, heard voices in the entryway. Curious despite myself, I crept to the door of my guest suite and opened it slightly, listening. "Mr. Nathaniel Pemberton?" A woman's voice, professional and serious. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Detective Sarah Morrison with the Birchwood Falls Police Department. We need to speak with you about Dorothy Pemberton." My blood ran cold. That was my name. Why were the police asking about me? My mother? Nathaniel sounded confused and concerned, and if I hadn't known better, I might have been touched by the worry in his voice. "What about her?" "She's here, she's been staying with us while she recovers from knee surgery." "Is something wrong?" "Sir, I'm afraid there's been an incident. We received a call early this morning from Mercy General Hospital. A woman matching your mother's description was brought into the emergency room late last night. She'd collapsed on a street corner downtown, near the intersection of Main Street and Harbor Avenue. She had no identification on her, but she gave the ER staff your name and this address before losing consciousness. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. I stood frozen behind my door, my hand pressed against my mouth to keep from making any sound. "That's impossible," Nathaniel said finally, and I could hear genuine confusion in his voice. "My mother has been here all week. She's in the guest room right now. She hasn't left the house, she can barely walk without assistance." "I understand this must be confusing, Mr. Pemberton. Could you check on your mother, please? Just to verify her whereabouts?" I heard footsteps on the marble floor, heard them coming closer. I barely had time to step back from the door before it swung open and Nathaniel stood there, his hair mussed from sleep, wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, his face pale with confusion. "Mom," he said, relief flooding his features. "You're here. I thought, there's a detective here," she says. He turned back toward the hallway where I could now see the detective standing, a woman in her 40s with short dark hair and a no-nonsense expression. "She's right here. There must be some mistake." Detective Morrison walked into the guest suite, her sharp eyes taking in the scene, me in my nightgown and robe, my half-packed suitcase on the bed, my cane leaning against the nightstand. "Mrs. Pemberton," she said, and I nodded mutely. "I'm glad to see you safe. But we do have a situation that needs to be addressed. Could I show you something?" She pulled out her phone and turned the screen toward me. On it was a photograph taken in what looked like a hospital room. The woman in the photo was lying in a bed, her white hair spread across the pillow, her face slack and peaceful in what might have been sleep or unconsciousness. The woman looked remarkably like me. Not identical, her face was slightly thinner, her nose a bit different, her skin more weathered, but the resemblance was striking. Same white hair, same general build, same approximate age. In the dim lighting of a hospital room, with the woman's eyes closed and her features relaxed, someone who didn't know me well might easily mistake her for me. "Is this you, Mrs. Pemberton?" Detective Morrison asked. "No," I whispered, my throat suddenly dry. "That's not me. But she looks. She looks very similar to you," the detective agreed. "The woman in this photo claims to be Dorothy Pemberton, age 70, of 247 Willowbrook Lane. She has detailed knowledge of your life, your family, your history. She specifically asked for your son by name." I felt the room starting to spin. Someone was impersonating me? Someone who looked enough like me to be convincing, who knew enough about my life to fool hospital staff? "I don't understand," Nathaniel said, and for once his confusion seemed genuine. "Who is she? Why would someone pretend to be my mother?" "That's what we're trying to determine," Detective Morrison replied. "The woman is currently sedated. She became extremely agitated when staff tried to question her, claiming she needed to speak to her son urgently, that she had important information about some kind of fraud or danger. Given the circumstances and her apparent distress, the hospital felt it best to involve law enforcement." "I need to see her," Nathaniel said immediately. "I need to go to the hospital and figure out who this woman is and what she wants. We'd appreciate if you could come down to identify her, yes. Mrs. Pemberton," she turned to me, "would you be willing to come as well? It might help us sort this situation out more quickly." I nodded, my mind racing. Who was this woman? And more importantly, why was she pretending to be me? Within the hour, Nathaniel, Penelope, and I were in Nathaniel's BMW, following Detective Morrison's unmarked police car toward Mercy General Hospital. The drive was silent, tense. Penelope sat in the passenger seat, her designer sunglasses hiding her eyes, her mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval at having her Saturday morning disrupted. Nathaniel drove with his jaw clenched, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I sat in the back seat, my cane across my lap, and watched the familiar streets of Birchwood Falls slide past. This was my town, the place where I'd raised my son, where I'd worked for 40 years, where I'd built my life. And now someone was here, in my hospital, claiming to be me. The emergency room was busy even on a Saturday morning, a teenager with what looked like a broken wrist, an elderly man coughing into a handkerchief, a young mother trying to soothe a crying baby. Detective Morrison led us past the waiting area, through a set of automatic doors, down a corridor to a small private room at the end. "She's in here," Morrison said. "She's awake now but still somewhat disoriented. Mrs. Pemberton, perhaps you should wait outside initially. Mr. Pemberton, if you could come with me?" I stood in the hallway with Penelope while Nathaniel followed the detective into the room. Through the small window in the door, I could see a bed, medical equipment, and a figure lying still beneath white sheets. The minutes stretched like hours. Penelope checked her phone, typed out messages, made a call to reschedule a property showing. I stood with my cane, my knee aching, my heart pounding, and waited. Finally, the door opened. Nathaniel emerged, his face ashen, and behind him came Detective Morrison and a doctor in a white coat. "Mom," Nathaniel said, his voice strange and hollow. "You need to see this." I followed him into the room, my cane tapping softly against the linoleum floor. And there, in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and IVs, was the woman from the photograph. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking and more obviously not me. She had similar features, similar coloring, but she was definitely not me. Her hands were rougher, calloused in ways mine weren't. Her eyes, now open and staring at us, were a slightly different shade of blue. She was, I realized with a strange jolt, what I might look like if I'd lived a harder life, if circumstances had been less kind. "Dorothy," the woman whispered, her voice raspy from sedation. "Dorothy Pemberton. I'm so sorry. I had to find you. Had to warn you." "Warn me about what?" I asked, moving closer to the bed. "Who are you? Why are you pretending to be me?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not pretending. I mean, I am, but not the way you think. My name is Margaret. Margaret Whitfield. And I'm your cousin." The name hit me like a train. Margaret Whitfield. My father's brother's daughter. I hadn't seen her in almost 50 years, not since I was 20 years old and she was 18. Our family had fractured after my grandmother died, some argument over property or money that I'd never fully understood. My father and his brother had stopped speaking, and the families had drifted apart. "Maggie?" I whispered, using the childhood nickname. "Is it really you?" She nodded, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "I know I look different. Life hasn't been kind. But Dorothy, I had to find you. I had to warn you about your son." Everything stopped. The monitors beeping, the voices in the hallway, even my own heartbeat seemed to pause. "What about my son?" Margaret's hand reached out, grasping mine with surprising strength. "He's planning something. Something terrible." I overheard. I was in Birchwood Falls. I'd been homeless here for the past year, and I heard him. Outside that coffee shop on Harbor Avenue. He was with a woman, not his wife. They were talking about you, about making you disappear, about staging something that would look like. She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I looked at Nathaniel, standing by the door, his face unreadable. Our eyes met, and in that instant, I saw something that made my blood freeze. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't confused. He was calculating. And in that moment, standing in that hospital room with a cousin I hadn't seen in 50 years, who'd become me to try to save me, I understood exactly how much danger I was really in. The hospital room felt like it was closing in on me. The steady beep of Margaret's heart monitor, the antiseptic smell that brought back memories of my own recent surgery, the fluorescent lights casting everything in harsh, unforgiving clarity, it all seemed to press down on me as I stood there, looking between my long-lost cousin and my son. Nathaniel's face had gone completely blank, that lawyer mask he wore in court slipping perfectly into place. But I'd seen that flash of calculation in his eyes, that momentary assessment of the situation before he controlled his expression. I'd seen it, and I couldn't unsee it. "This is insane," Nathaniel said finally, his voice carefully modulated to sound concerned but rational. "Detective Morrison, this woman is clearly confused or mentally ill." "She's homeless, you said?" She's probably suffering from exposure, malnutrition, who knows what else. She's latched onto some fantasy about my mother. I'm not confused, Margaret said, her voice gaining strength despite her obvious exhaustion. Dorothy, I know this sounds crazy. I know I look like I've been through hell, because I have. But I'm telling you the truth. I heard him. I heard your son and that woman talking about you like you were already dead. Detective Morrison pulled out a notepad. Mrs. Whitfield, can you tell us exactly what you heard and when? Margaret's hand tightened around mine. She looked at Nathaniel with something like fear in her eyes, then back at me. It was Wednesday evening, 3 days ago. I was sleeping in the alley behind Lakeside Coffee House. There's a heating vent there that keeps you warm at night. Around 9 o'clock, I heard voices out on the patio. The coffee house closes at 8, so the patio was empty, but these two people were out there talking. I recognized the man's voice because I'd heard him before. Heard him before? I asked, my throat tight. I've been in Birchwood Falls for about a year, Margaret explained, her eyes distant with memory. After my husband died and I lost our house, I ended up on the streets. I knew you were here, I'd thought about finding you, asking for help, but I was too ashamed. Too proud, maybe. But I'd seen you around town a few times. And I'd seen your son too. He comes to that coffee house sometimes for meetings. I recognized him Wednesday night because of his voice. He has that particular way of speaking, very precise, very controlled. Nathaniel shifted his weight, crossing his arms. This is ridiculous. I wasn't at any coffee house on Wednesday evening. I was at the office until 10 working on the Stratford merger. Let her finish, Detective Morrison said quietly. Margaret continued, her voice shaking slightly. He was with a woman, younger, I think, from her voice. They were arguing, but trying to keep it quiet. The woman said something like, "We can't keep waiting, Nathaniel. She's going to find out eventually, and then what?" And he said, "She won't find out. I've been careful. Besides, in a few weeks it won't matter anymore." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That must have been Vanessa. The timeline matched. Wednesday night was the night after I'd first overheard them in the bedroom. The woman asked what he meant, Margaret went on, and that's when he said it. He said, "My mother has a life insurance policy worth $500,000. She's 70 years old with a history of cancer. If something were to happen to her, another health crisis, maybe complications from her recent surgery, well, these things happen to elderly people. Tragic, but not suspicious." The room went silent except for the beeping monitors. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like someone had wrapped hands around my throat and was slowly squeezing. "That's a lie," Nathaniel said, but his voice had taken on a sharp edge. "I never said any such thing. This woman is obviously delusional, and I don't appreciate being accused of whatever she's suggesting, based on the alleged ravings of a homeless person who may or may not have overheard a conversation that may or may not have even happened." "There's more," Margaret said, looking directly at me. "The woman, Vanessa, he called her, she asked if he was really going to do it. And he said, 'I don't have to do anything. I just have to make sure she's in the right place at the right time. The stairs in her cottage are steep. She's recovering from surgery. Accidents happen.' And then he laughed, Dorothy. He laughed and said, 'Besides, she's staying with us now. Under our roof, under our care. If anything happens, everyone will know we did everything we could.'" I felt my knees start to buckle. Nathaniel moved forward as if to catch me, but I jerked away from him, steadying myself with my cane. The son I'd raised, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, had been planning my death like it was just another legal strategy to execute. "Mom, don't listen to this," Nathaniel said, his voice taking on a pleading quality now. "Can't you see what's happening? This woman shows up out of nowhere, claiming to be some long-lost cousin, spinning these insane stories. Maybe someone put her up to this. Maybe someone's trying to drive a wedge between us." Detective Morrison was watching all of this with sharp, assessing eyes. "Mr. Pemberton, Where were you on Wednesday evening between 8 and 10 p.m.? I told you, I was at my office. Working late on the Stratford merger. You can check with building security, they log everyone in and out. We will, Morrison said calmly. Mrs. Whitfield, after you heard this conversation, what did you do? Margaret's eyes filled with tears again. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I don't have a phone, I don't have any way to contact Dorothy directly. I knew where she lived, I'd walked past her cottage a few times, working up the courage to knock on her door and face my shame. But I didn't know if she was there or if she was still staying with her son. I spent all day Thursday trying to figure out what to do. And then? Morrison prompted. Thursday night, I was near the Lakeside Estates neighborhood. I thought maybe I could find out which house was his, maybe warn Dorothy somehow. But the security guard at the gate wouldn't let me in, obviously. She gave a bitter laugh. Homeless people aren't welcome in neighborhoods like that. I tried to explain it was an emergency, that I needed to reach someone, but he threatened to call the police if I didn't leave. So what did you do? I asked softly. I walked back downtown. I was exhausted, hungry, confused. I sat down on a bench on Main Street, trying to think. And that's when I saw the poster. What poster? Detective Morrison asked. Margaret looked at me with something like apology in her eyes. It was at a bus stop. An advertisement for life insurance. And the woman in the ad, she looked like me. Like us. Same white hair, same build. And I thought if I pretended to be you, if I got into a hospital where there would be records and witnesses, if I could make them call your son and force a confrontation where you'd be safe, surrounded by doctors and police, maybe I could save you. So you deliberately collapsed on the street, Morrison said, understanding dawning in her eyes. I stopped taking my blood pressure medication, Margaret admitted. I've had hypertension for years. When I had insurance, they managed it, but on the streets. I've been rationing the free clinic samples. Thursday night, I skipped my dose. Friday morning, I skipped it again. By Friday evening, I knew my blood pressure would be dangerously high. I just had to wait for it to happen. Jesus Christ, Penelope muttered from where she'd been standing silently by the door. This is insane. Nathaniel, we're leaving. This woman is clearly mentally unstable, and I'm not spending my Saturday morning listening to her delusions. Mrs. Morrison, I'm Penelope Pemberton, she addressed the detective with the commanding tone she probably used with difficult clients. My husband and I have been more than patient, but this has gone far enough. This woman needs psychiatric evaluation, and my mother-in-law needs to come home where she can rest properly. This stress isn't good for her recovery. Something about Penelope's tone, the casual way she referred to me as someone who needed to be managed and controlled, made something click in my mind. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I'd been too naive or too willing to believe the best in people to see before. She knew. Penelope knew about the affair. Maybe she'd known all along. And more than that, she was part of whatever was happening. The way she'd been so eager for me to leave, the way she and Nathaniel had been coordinating without seeming to communicate, the way she was now trying to shut down this conversation and get me back to their house, back under their control. I'm not going anywhere, I said, and my voice came out stronger than I expected. Detective Morrison, I want to hear everything Margaret has to say. And I want you to check Nathaniel's alibi for Wednesday night. Mom, please, Nathaniel said, and now there was genuine emotion in his voice, but I couldn't tell if it was concern or fear of being caught. You're upset, you're confused. Let's go home and talk about this privately, as a family. No, I said firmly. We're talking about it here, with witnesses. Nathaniel's mask slipped for just a moment, and what I saw underneath chilled me to the bone. It was cold calculation, assessment of options, the look of someone trying to figure out how to minimize damage and regain control of a situation spinning away from him. Detective Morrison seemed to sense the shift in the room's energy. Mr. Pemberton, I'm going to need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. Mrs. Pemberton, Dorothy, given the circumstances and Mrs. Whitfield's allegations, I'd recommend you not return to your son's residence until we've had a chance to investigate these claims more thoroughly. That's ridiculous, Penelope snapped. You can't seriously be suggesting that Nathaniel would harm his own mother. This is harassment based on the word of a mentally ill vagrant who... I have cancer, Margaret interrupted quietly. Stage 4. The free clinic diagnosed me 2 months ago. That's why I was so desperate to find Dorothy, to warn her, before it was too late. I don't have much time left, and I wanted to do at least one good thing before I die. I wanted to save my cousin, even if I couldn't save myself. The room fell silent again. I looked at Margaret, really looked at her, and saw the truth of it in the hollows of her cheeks, the yellowing of her skin, the particular kind of exhaustion that came from a body slowly shutting down. Oh, Maggie, I whispered, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. I'm so sorry. If I'd known you were here, if I'd known you needed help. I know, she said softly. I know you would have helped. You always were the kind one in the family. But Dorothy, please. Don't go back to that house. Don't trust them. Not until someone's figured out what's really going on. Dr. Patterson, who'd been standing quietly in the corner observing all this, finally spoke up. Mrs. Whitfield needs rest. This conversation is taking a toll on her already weakened condition. Detective, perhaps we could continue this another time? Morrison nodded. Of course. Dorothy, do you have somewhere safe you can stay? Friends, other family? I thought about my cottage on Willowbrook Lane, standing empty. But Nathaniel had a key. He'd had one for years, for emergencies. If Margaret's accusations were true, if he really had been planning something, my own home might not be safe. She can stay with us, a voice said from the doorway. We all turned to see an elderly woman standing there, probably in her mid-70s, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I'm Dr. Helen Winters. I'm the hospital's patient advocate, and I've been listening to this conversation from the hallway. Dorothy, if you need somewhere safe to stay while this is sorted out, you're welcome to use my guest room. You can't be serious, Nathaniel said, his voice rising. Some random hospital employee is offering to take my mother home, and you all think that's appropriate? I'm not a random employee, Dr. Winters said coolly. I've worked at this hospital for 42 years. I know Dorothy, we've served together on the hospital volunteer board. And given the circumstances, yes, I think it's entirely appropriate for her to have somewhere safe and neutral to stay. I did recognize her, I realized. Helen Winters had been at countless charity events, hospital fundraisers, volunteer appreciation dinners. We weren't close friends, but we were friendly acquaintances, fellow volunteers who'd chatted over coffee and discussed community health initiatives. Thank you, I said to her. I'd appreciate that very much. This is absurd, Penelope said, her voice sharp with barely controlled fury. Nathaniel, call our lawyer. I don't even know what this is, but we're not standing here and letting some homeless woman and a bunch of strangers turn Dorothy against us. The only person who's turned me against you, I said quietly, is you. Both of you. Nathaniel's face hardened. Fine. If you want to believe the ravings of a mentally ill vagrant over your own son, that's your choice. But don't come crying to me when you realize you've made a terrible mistake. He turned and strode out of the room, Penelope following behind him with one last contemptuous look at all of us. After they left, Detective Morrison spent another hour taking statements from Margaret and me. I told her about overhearing the conversation between Nathaniel and Vanessa, about the discussions of my inheritance and life insurance, about Penelope's eagerness to have me gone. Margaret repeated her story in more detail, including descriptions of Nathaniel and Vanessa that were too accurate to be made up. I'll be honest with you, Dorothy, Morrison said as she closed her notepad. Without concrete evidence, this is going to be difficult to prove. What Margaret overheard isn't admissible in court, it's hearsay at best. But it's enough for me to open an investigation. I'll check security footage from your son's office building, interview the staff at Lakeside Coffee House, see if anyone saw him there Wednesday night. I'll also look into your financial situation, your life insurance policies, see if there are any irregularities. What should I do? I asked. Stay away from your son and daughter-in-law for now. Don't go to your cottage alone. In fact, I'd recommend not going there at all until we know more. If Nathaniel has keys, we don't know what he might have done there. Let Dr. Winter's offer stand. And Dorothy? Morrison looked at me seriously. Don't tell anyone where you're staying. Not friends, not other family members, no one who might inadvertently mention it to your son. I nodded, feeling the weight of it all settling on my shoulders. In the space of a few days, my entire life had been turned upside down. I discovered my son was having an affair, that he saw me as nothing more than a financial asset waiting to be claimed, and that he might actually be planning to harm me. And the only person who tried to help me was a cousin I hadn't seen in 50 years, who was now dying in a hospital bed. Dr. Winters drove me to her house in comfortable silence. She lived in a modest 2-story colonial in an older neighborhood, the kind of solid, well-maintained house that spoke of years of careful stewardship. The guest room was on the first floor. She mentioned that she'd had it set up for easy access after her own hip surgery a few years ago. I'll give you some space, she said kindly. But Dorothy, if you need anything, to talk, to cry, to scream at the universe, I'm here. That night, lying in yet another guest bed in yet another stranger's house, I finally let myself fall apart. I cried for the son I'd lost, or maybe for the son I'd never really had. I cried for the years I'd spent proud of his success, never seeing the cold ambition and greed underneath. I cried for my cousin Margaret, dying alone on the streets until desperation had driven her to risk her life to save mine. And I cried for myself, for the naive old woman who'd believed that love and sacrifice meant something, that family was sacred, that blood bonds couldn't be broken by something as crass as money. But as the tears finally dried and exhaustion began to pull me toward sleep, I felt something else beginning to grow inside me. It was small at first, just a tiny ember of heat in my chest. But it was there, and it was growing. Anger. Dr. Winters drove me to her house in comfortable silence. She lived in a modest 2-story colonial in an older neighborhood, the kind of solid, well-maintained house that spoke of years of careful stewardship. The guest room was on the first floor. She mentioned that she'd had it set up for easy access after her own hip surgery a few years ago. I'll give you some space, she said kindly. But Dorothy, if you need anything, to talk, to cry, to scream at the universe, I'm here. That night, lying in yet another guest bed in yet another stranger's house, I finally let myself fall apart. I cried for the son I'd lost, or maybe for the son I'd never really had. I cried for the years I'd spent proud of his success, never seeing the cold ambition and greed underneath. I cried for my cousin Margaret, dying alone on the streets until desperation had driven her to risk her life to save mine. And I cried for myself, for the naive old woman who'd believed that love and sacrifice meant something, that family was sacred, that blood bonds couldn't be broken by something as crass as money. But as the tears finally dried and exhaustion began to pull me toward sleep, I felt something else beginning to grow inside me. It was small at first, just a tiny ember of heat in my chest. But it was there, and it was growing. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind that burns out quickly. This was colder, more focused. This was the anger of someone who'd been used, manipulated, and marked for death by the people who should have protected her. And with that anger came a decision. I wasn't going to sit quietly and wait for someone to save me. I wasn't going to be the helpless old woman everyone seemed to think I was. If Nathaniel wanted to play games with my life, if he wanted to treat me like a chess piece to be sacrificed for his own gain, then he was about to learn that this particular piece still had some moves left. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. I woke early, my knees stiff but manageable, and found Dr. Winters already in the kitchen making coffee. "How did you sleep?" she asked. "Better than I expected," I admitted. "Helen, I need to ask you something. Do you know anyone who specializes in financial fraud? Someone who could help me understand my own accounts, make sure nothing's been tampered with?" She looked at me appraisingly, then nodded slowly. "I know someone. Marcus Chen, he's a forensic accountant. His firm handles fraud investigations, estate disputes, that sort of thing. He's good, discreet, and he owes me a favor. Want me to call him? Please. By noon, I was sitting in Helen's living room across from Marcus Chin, a serious-looking man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and an air of quiet competence. I'd brought every financial document I had with me, bank statements, insurance policies, investment records, and spread them across Helen's coffee table. Walk me through your situation, Marcus said, pulling out a notepad. I told him everything. The overheard conversations, Margaret's warnings, my son's access to my accounts, the life insurance policy. Marcus listened without interrupting, making occasional notes, his expression giving nothing away. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Dorothy, I'm going to be very direct with you. If your son has power of attorney or any kind of fiduciary access to your accounts, and if he's been planning what Mrs. Whitfield suggested, there's a good chance he's already taken steps to position himself advantageously. We need to check everything, every account, every policy, every asset you have. Over the next several hours, Marcus went through my finances with meticulous care. He called banks, insurance companies, investment firms, using his credentials as a forensic accountant to access information I wouldn't have been able to get on my own. What he found made my blood run cold. Dorothy, he said finally, setting down his phone and looking at me with grave concern. I found several irregularities. First, your life insurance policy. You said it was worth $500,000? Yes, I took it out 20 years ago. Nathaniel is the beneficiary. The policy was increased 6 months ago to $750,000. Did you authorize that increase? My heart stopped. No. I didn't even know it had been increased. The paperwork shows your signature, but I'd recommend having it analyzed by a handwriting expert. There are also some troubling additions to the policy, specifically, accidental death clauses that would double the payout under certain circumstances. What circumstances? Falls, accidents in the home, that sort of thing. Exactly the kind of thing that might happen to an elderly person recovering from surgery who lived alone. I felt sick. What else? Your bank accounts show several transfers that you might want to examine. Nothing huge, a few $100s here and there, but they're consistent and they all go to an account registered to something called Pemberton Family Trust. Do you know anything about that? No. I never set up any family trust. Marcus's expression grew even grimmer. Then someone else did, using your information. This is sophisticated, Dorothy. Whoever's behind this has been planning it carefully, setting up financial structures that would allow them to access your money while making it look legitimate. Can we stop it? Can we freeze the accounts or something? We can, but we have to be strategic about it. If we move too quickly, if your son realizes you know what's going on, he might accelerate whatever he's planning. Or he might have contingencies in place that we don't know about yet. So what do we do? Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. We document everything. We build a case that's airtight. And we do it quietly, without tipping our hand. In the meantime, you stay safe, you stay hidden, and you don't trust anyone connected to your son. Over the next 2 days, Marcus worked with the speed and efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. He contacted his network of investigators, forensic specialists, and legal experts. He pulled records, traced financial patterns, and built what he called the paper trail of intent. Meanwhile, Detective Morrison called with an update. Dorothy, I checked with security at your son's office building. Nathaniel didn't log in on Wednesday evening. His keycard wasn't used at all after 5 p.m. I also spoke with staff at Lakeside Coffee House. They remember seeing him there Wednesday night around 9, in the back patio area with a woman matching the description of Vanessa Thorne. So Margaret was telling the truth. It appears so. I'm continuing the investigation, but I wanted you to know that her story checks out so far. On Tuesday afternoon, I went back to the hospital to see Margaret. She was weaker than before, the cancer and the stress of the past few days taking their toll. But her eyes lit up when she saw me. Dorothy, she whispered. You're safe. Thank God. I took her hand, thin and fragile in mine. Thanks to you, Maggie. You saved my life. I just wish I'd found you sooner. Wish I'd had the courage to ask for help before things got so bad. Don't, I said firmly. We all make choices we regret. But you made the choice that mattered most when it counted. You saved me. We talked for an hour, filling in the gaps of 50 lost years. She told me about her life, a happy marriage that ended when her husband had a stroke, medical bills that consumed their savings, foreclosure on their home, the slow slide into homelessness and poverty. I told her about raising Nathaniel alone, about the pride I'd felt watching him succeed, about the gradual realization that success had cost him his humanity. I keep thinking about what I did wrong, I admitted. Where I failed in raising him. How did he become someone who could plan his own mother's death? Margaret squeezed my hand weakly. You didn't fail, Dorothy. Some people are just broken in ways we can't fix. You gave him love and opportunity. What he did with those gifts, that's on him, not you. On Wednesday morning, Marcus Chin called with news that made my decision for me. Dorothy, I've found something. Your cottage on Willowbrook Lane, did you know that property records show it's being prepared for sale? What? That's impossible. I never authorized any sale. The listing hasn't gone public yet, but the preliminary paperwork has been filed. It's being handled by Pemberton Properties Real Estate, that's Penelope's company. They're positioning it as an estate sale, which means they're planning to sell it after I'm dead, I finished, my voice hollow. Exactly. And Dorothy, there's more. I contacted a colleague who specializes in insurance fraud. She looked at your life insurance policy, at the timing of the changes, at the beneficiary structure. She said this has all the hallmarks of a planned death scheme. The increased payout, the accidental death clauses, the timing coinciding with your surgery and recovery, it's textbook. I sat down heavily in Helen's kitchen chair, my cane clattering to the floor. So what do I do? How do I stop this? That's the thing, Marcus said carefully. We have enough evidence now to bring charges: fraud, forgery, conspiracy. But Dorothy, there's another option. One that might give you more leverage. What option? We let them think it worked. I listened as Marcus outlined his plan, and with each word, that ember of anger in my chest burned brighter and hotter. By the time he finished, I was smiling, a cold, sharp smile that felt foreign on my face but somehow perfectly right. Let's do it, I said. Let's give them exactly what they wanted. That afternoon, I called Detective Morrison and told her I wanted to meet with her, Marcus Chen, and Helen Winters. We needed to plan carefully, coordinate perfectly. Because what I was about to do would require timing, nerve, and the kind of cold-blooded calculation that my son had taught me, though he'd never intended the lesson. If Nathaniel wanted me dead, if he'd planned so carefully to make it happen, then I would give him his wish. I would die. And then, from beyond the grave, I would destroy him. Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after I'd first overheard Nathaniel and Vanessa in the bedroom, Detective Morrison stood in Helen Winters' living room with a grim expression. Are you absolutely sure about this, Dorothy? Once we set this in motion, there's no going back. I looked around the room, at Helen, who'd opened her home to a virtual stranger, at Marcus Chen, who'd worked tirelessly to uncover the truth, at Detective Morrison, who was willing to risk her reputation on an unorthodox plan. And I thought about Margaret, lying in a hospital bed, having risked her life to save mine. I'm sure, I said firmly. Let's make me disappear. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. But as Marcus Chen laid out the details across Helen's dining room table, I realized it was also brilliant in its simplicity. The key, Marcus explained, pushing documents across the table toward Detective Morrison, is that we need this to be believable but also legally watertight. We can't actually fake Dorothy's death in any official capacity, that would be fraud. But we can create a situation where Nathaniel and Penelope believe she's dead long enough for them to incriminate themselves. Detective Morrison studied the papers, her brow furrowed. You're talking about a sting operation. Using Dorothy as bait. Not as bait, Marcus corrected. Dorothy will be completely safe and out of the picture. But yes, essentially we're setting a trap. One they'll walk right into if they believe she's dead. Helen Winters, who'd been listening quietly while pouring coffee for everyone, finally spoke. Explain to me how this works without actually filing a false death certificate. Because I won't be part of anything that crosses legal lines, no matter how much I want to help Dorothy. We don't file anything official, Marcus said. Here's what we do: Dorothy disappears. Completely. No contact with anyone connected to her old life. Meanwhile, we let certain information leak: hospital rumors, whispered conversations, ambiguous social media posts from people who might have heard something. Nothing concrete, nothing that could be traced back to us, but enough to make Nathaniel and Penelope think their plan worked. They'll try to confirm it, Detective Morrison pointed out. They'll call hospitals, check with the coroner, look for death certificates. And they'll find nothing, Marcus said with a thin smile. Which will make them think we're covering it up, that maybe there's some kind of investigation or complication. It'll drive them crazy, make them sloppy. And while they're scrambling to figure out what happened, we'll be watching. Recording. Documenting every move they make. I listened to all this with a strange sense of detachment, as if they were discussing someone else's life, someone else's death. But then I thought about Nathaniel's cold calculation in that hospital room, about the increased life insurance policy I'd never authorized, about my cottage being prepared for sale before I was even gone. How long would I have to stay hidden? I asked. 2 weeks, Marcus said. Maybe 3. Long enough for them to start making moves, trying to access your accounts, filing insurance claims, putting your house on the market. Once they take concrete actions based on believing you're dead, we'll have them on fraud charges, conspiracy, attempted murder if we can prove intent. What about Margaret? I asked. She's in the hospital. If Nathaniel thinks I'm dead, he might. Margaret is being transferred to a private care facility, Detective Morrison said. One that specializes in end-of-life care for indigent patients. It's a legitimate facility, funded by the county, and Nathaniel won't be able to find her there. She'll be safe, comfortable, and cared for properly. I nodded, feeling tears prick at my eyes. At least something good would come from this nightmare. Maggie would spend her final days in dignity and peace. There's one more element we need, Marcus said, looking at me seriously. Dorothy, we need you to write a letter. Something Nathaniel will find after he thinks you're dead. Something that will push him to act quickly and recklessly. What kind of letter? I took her hand, thin and fragile in mine. Thanks to you, Maggie. You saved my life. I just wish I'd found you sooner. Wish I'd had the courage to ask for help before things got so bad. Don't, I said firmly. We all make choices we regret. But you made the choice that mattered most when it counted. You saved me. We talked for an hour, filling in the gaps of 50 lost years. She told me about her life, a happy marriage that ended when her husband had a stroke, medical bills that consumed their savings, foreclosure on their home, the slow slide into homelessness and poverty. I told her about raising Nathaniel alone, about the pride I'd felt watching him succeed, about the gradual realization that success had cost him his humanity. I keep thinking about what I did wrong, I admitted. Where I failed in raising him. How did he become someone who could plan his own mother's death? Margaret squeezed my hand weakly. You didn't fail, Dorothy. Some people are just broken in ways we can't fix. You gave him love and opportunity. What he did with those gifts, that's on him, not you. On Wednesday morning, Marcus Chin called with news that made my decision for me. Dorothy, I've found something. Your cottage on Willowbrook Lane, did you know that property records show it's being prepared for sale? What? That's impossible. I never authorized any sale. The listing hasn't gone public yet, but the preliminary paperwork has been filed. It's being handled by Pemberton Properties Real Estate, that's Penelope's company. They're positioning it as an estate sale, which means they're planning to sell it after I'm dead, I finished, my voice hollow. Exactly. And Dorothy, there's more. I contacted a colleague who specializes in insurance fraud. She looked at your life insurance policy, at the timing of the changes, at the beneficiary structure. She said this has all the hallmarks of a planned death scheme. The increased payout, the accidental death clauses, the timing coinciding with your surgery and recovery, it's textbook. I sat down heavily in Helen's kitchen chair, my cane clattering to the floor. So what do I do? How do I stop this? That's the thing, Marcus said carefully. We have enough evidence now to bring charges: fraud, forgery, conspiracy. But Dorothy, there's another option. One that might give you more leverage. What option? We let them think it worked. I listened as Marcus outlined his plan, and with each word, that ember of anger in my chest burned brighter and hotter. By the time he finished, I was smiling, a cold, sharp smile that felt foreign on my face but somehow perfectly right. Let's do it, I said. Let's give them exactly what they wanted. That afternoon, I called Detective Morrison and told her I wanted to meet with her, Marcus Chen, and Helen Winters. We needed to plan carefully, coordinate perfectly. Because what I was about to do would require timing, nerve, and the kind of cold-blooded calculation that my son had taught me, though he'd never intended the lesson. If Nathaniel wanted me dead, if he'd planned so carefully to make it happen, then I would give him his wish. I would die. And then, from beyond the grave, I would destroy him. Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after I'd first overheard Nathaniel and Vanessa in the bedroom, Detective Morrison stood in Helen Winters' living room with a grim expression. Are you absolutely sure about this, Dorothy? Once we set this in motion, there's no going back. I looked around the room, at Helen, who'd opened her home to a virtual stranger, at Marcus Chen, who'd worked tirelessly to uncover the truth, at Detective Morrison, who was willing to risk her reputation on an unorthodox plan. And I thought about Margaret, lying in a hospital bed, having risked her life to save mine. I'm sure, I said firmly. Let's make me disappear. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. But as Marcus Chen laid out the details across Helen's dining room table, I realized it was also brilliant in its simplicity. The key, Marcus explained, pushing documents across the table toward Detective Morrison, is that we need this to be believable but also legally watertight. We can't actually fake Dorothy's death in any official capacity, that would be fraud. But we can create a situation where Nathaniel and Penelope believe she's dead long enough for them to incriminate themselves. Detective Morrison studied the papers, her brow furrowed. You're talking about a sting operation. Using Dorothy as bait. Not as bait, Marcus corrected. Dorothy will be completely safe and out of the picture. But yes, essentially we're setting a trap. One they'll walk right into if they believe she's dead. Helen Winters, who'd been listening quietly while pouring coffee for everyone, finally spoke. Explain to me how this works without actually filing a false death certificate. Because I won't be part of anything that crosses legal lines, no matter how much I want to help Dorothy. We don't file anything official, Marcus said. Here's what we do: Dorothy disappears. Completely. No contact with anyone connected to her old life. Meanwhile, we let certain information leak: hospital rumors, whispered conversations, ambiguous social media posts from people who might have heard something. Nothing concrete, nothing that could be traced back to us, but enough to make Nathaniel and Penelope think their plan worked. They'll try to confirm it, Detective Morrison pointed out. They'll call hospitals, check with the coroner, look for death certificates. And they'll find nothing, Marcus said with a thin smile. Which will make them think we're covering it up, that maybe there's some kind of investigation or complication. It'll drive them crazy, make them sloppy. And while they're scrambling to figure out what happened, we'll be watching. Recording. Documenting every move they make. I listened to all this with a strange sense of detachment, as if they were discussing someone else's life, someone else's death. But then I thought about Nathaniel's cold calculation in that hospital room, about the increased life insurance policy I'd never authorized, about my cottage being prepared for sale before I was even gone. How long would I have to stay hidden? I asked. 2 weeks, Marcus said. Maybe 3. Long enough for them to start making moves, trying to access your accounts, filing insurance claims, putting your house on the market. Once they take concrete actions based on believing you're dead, we'll have them on fraud charges, conspiracy, attempted murder if we can prove intent. What about Margaret? I asked. She's in the hospital. If Nathaniel thinks I'm dead, he might. Margaret is being transferred to a private care facility, Detective Morrison said. One that specializes in end-of-life care for indigent patients. It's a legitimate facility, funded by the county, and Nathaniel won't be able to find her there. She'll be safe, comfortable, and cared for properly. I nodded, feeling tears prick at my eyes. At least something good would come from this nightmare. Maggie would spend her final days in dignity and peace. There's one more element we need, Marcus said, looking at me seriously. Dorothy, we need you to write a letter. Something Nathaniel will find after he thinks you're dead. Something that will push him to act quickly and recklessly. What kind of letter? One that suggests you knew what he was planning. One that hints you've taken steps to protect yourself, changed your will, moved your assets. We want him panicked, making mistakes. And we want it all documented. Over the next 3 days, we prepared meticulously. I wrote the letter Marcus had suggested, a carefully worded message that implied I'd discovered the plot against me and taken countermeasures. It was sealed in an envelope marked to be opened only by Nathaniel Pemberton and left with Helen's lawyer, with instructions to deliver it to my son 1 week after I had disappeared. Detective Morrison arranged for surveillance. Cameras would be set up outside Nathaniel's house, outside my cottage, outside Penelope's real estate office. Phone taps were authorized by a judge who, when presented with the evidence we'd gathered, agreed there was probable cause to believe a crime had been committed or was about to be. Marcus worked with his contacts to set up monitoring on all my financial accounts. Any attempt to access them, any transfer requests, any insurance claims, all of it would be flagged and recorded immediately. And I said goodbye to my life. I walked through Helen's house, touching the furniture, looking at her family photos, trying to memorize what it felt like to exist in the world. Because for the next few weeks, I wouldn't exist. I would be a ghost, a memory, a woman erased from the world by her own son's greed. On Monday morning, exactly 10 days after I'd first overheard Nathaniel's affair, I disappeared. Helen drove me to a small bed and breakfast 3 hours outside Birchwood Falls, in a tiny town called Riverside Crossing that most people had never heard of. The owner, a retired police officer named Frank Morrison, no relation to Detective Morrison, was a friend of Helen's and had agreed to house me without asking questions. "You'll be safe here," Frank said as he showed me to a room on the 2nd floor. "Nobody knows this place exists except locals and the occasional lost tourist. You need anything, you just ask." The room was simple but comfortable, a double bed with a handmade quilt, a rocking chair by the window, a small desk. From the window, I could see a lazy river winding through farmland, and in the distance, hills covered with pine trees. It was peaceful, quiet, and utterly isolated. I called Helen once to let her know I'd arrived safely. Then I turned off my phone and removed the battery, just as Marcus had instructed. For the next few weeks, I was Dorothy Pemberton, deceased. The waiting was the hardest part. I spent my days reading books from Frank's extensive library, taking short walks along the river, careful to avoid the few other guests at the bed and breakfast, and trying not to think about what was happening back in Birchwood Falls. But on the 4th day of my disappearance, Helen called Frank's landline with news. "It started," she said quietly. "Nathaniel filed a missing person report this morning. Claims you left his house last Saturday and he hasn't heard from you since. He's playing the worried son perfectly, press conferences, social media appeals, the whole performance." "What about Penelope?" I asked. "She's more subdued, but she's backing up his story. They're both claiming they tried to convince you to stay with them, that you were upset and irrational after the incident at the hospital with Margaret, and you insisted on leaving despite their concerns for your safety." "Incident at the hospital," I repeated bitterly. "That's one way to describe discovering your son planned to murder you." "There's more," Helen continued. "Nathaniel went to your cottage yesterday. Our surveillance cameras caught him searching through your things. He found your financial documents, or at least, the ones we left for him to find. We'd planted specific documents, doctored bank statements showing I'd moved substantial sums to offshore accounts, fake correspondence with lawyers about changing my will, forged notes suggesting I was planning to press charges against him for financial fraud. All of it designed to make him panic, to make him think his carefully constructed plan was falling apart. How did he react? He was on the phone within minutes. We couldn't hear what he was saying. He was smart enough to go outside, but Marcus's team tracked the call. It was to Vanessa Thorne. 2 days later, the letter was delivered. According to Detective Morrison, who called with an update, Nathaniel had opened it in his office at the law firm. The security cameras there, which he didn't know had been accessed by the police, showed him reading my words, his face going pale, then flushed with anger. The letter read, "Nathaniel. If you're reading this, then I'm gone. But before I left, I wanted you to know that I knew. I heard you with Vanessa. I heard your plans. I know about the life insurance policy you altered, about the trust fund you created in my name, about my house being prepared for sale. I also want you to know that I've taken steps to protect myself. My assets have been moved. My will has been changed. And I've left detailed records of everything I discovered with several trusted individuals, with instructions to deliver them to the authorities if anything happens to me. I don't know what I did to make you hate me so much that you'd plan my death. I gave you everything I had, my time, my money, my love. But apparently, it wasn't enough. You wanted more. You wanted everything, including my life. I hope it was worth it, Nathaniel. I hope when you count the money you thought you'd inherit, when you move into my house with your mistress, when you collect on that insurance policy, I hope it fills whatever emptiness made you into the kind of man who could kill his own mother. I loved you. That's the tragedy of all this. Even knowing what you are, what you were planning to do, I still love you. That's what mothers do. Goodbye, Nathaniel. I hope you can live with yourself. Mom." According to Morrison, Nathaniel had left the office immediately after reading the letter, driving directly to Penelope's real estate office. The surveillance team followed him, recording everything. "They're unraveling," Morrison told me over the phone. Vanessa showed up at Penelope's office an hour after Nathaniel arrived. The three of them were in there for 2 hours, and when they came out, they all looked terrified. Whatever they're planning, they're doing it now. On the 8th day of my disappearance, Nathaniel filed for a declaration of death. It was a legal maneuver used when someone goes missing under circumstances suggesting they might be dead. Normally, you'd have to wait years before filing such a petition, but Nathaniel was arguing that my age, my medical history, and the suspicious circumstances of my disappearance warranted an expedited process. He's desperate, Marcus explained when he called with the news. He knows the insurance companies won't pay out without a death certificate, and he can't get a death certificate without a body or a legal declaration. He's trying to force the system to declare you dead so he can start accessing your assets. Will it work? Not a chance. The judge will laugh him out of court. You've only been missing a week. But the fact that he's trying tells us everything we need to know. He's committed now. He believes you're dead, and he's willing to risk exposure to get what he thinks he's owed. On the 10th day, everything came to a head. I was sitting in my room at the bed and breakfast, watching the sun set over the river, when Frank knocked on my door. "Dorothy, you've got a phone call. Detective Morrison. She says it's urgent." I followed him downstairs to his office, my heart pounding. Morrison's voice, when I picked up the phone, was tight with controlled excitement. "Dorothy, we've got them. All 3 of them. You need to come back to Birchwood Falls tomorrow morning. We're making arrests." "What happened?" "Nathaniel tried to file a fraudulent insurance claim this afternoon. $750,000, claiming you died in an accident at your cottage. But here's the beautiful part, the insurance investigator asked for evidence, and Nathaniel provided doctored medical records, a fake coroner's report, everything. He'd been preparing this for months, Dorothy. We have documents showing he created this entire false paper trail before your surgery, just waiting for the right moment to use it. My breath caught. He really was planning to kill me. There's no question now. We have him on insurance fraud, forgery, conspiracy. And when we picked apart the documents, we found something else, evidence that he'd been researching methods to cause a fall that would look accidental. Internet searches on his home computer for things like medications that cause dizziness, making stairs slippery, elderly fall statistics. He documented his own conspiracy. What about Penelope and Vanessa? Penelope was actively involved in the financial fraud. We have emails between her and Nathaniel discussing how to liquidate your assets once you were dead. And Vanessa, she was helping him create alibis, providing cover stories. She may not have known the full extent of what he was planning, but she was complicit in the financial crimes. I sank into Frank's desk chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. It was real. All of it was real. My son had actually planned to murder me for money. There's something else, Morrison said quietly. We found out why he needed the money so badly. Nathaniel's firm is under investigation by the State Bar Association for misappropriating client funds. He's been using settlement money to cover personal expenses, gambling debts, lifestyle costs. He was going to be disbarred, probably prosecuted. He needed your insurance money to pay back what he'd stolen before the investigation concluded. So it all came down to that. Not just greed, but desperation. He'd stolen from his clients, and he'd planned to murder his mother to cover it up. When do you make the arrests? I asked. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. I want you there, Dorothy. I want you to see this. The next morning, Helen drove me back to Birchwood Falls in pre-dawn darkness. We arrived at the police station just as the sun was beginning to paint the sky pink and gold. Detective Morrison met us in the parking lot, her expression grim but satisfied. They're being picked up right now, she said. Separate teams for each of them. We should have them all here within the hour. We waited in Morrison's office, drinking coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, watching the clock tick towards 7 a.m. I kept thinking I should feel something, triumph, satisfaction, vindication. But all I felt was a deep, bone-weary sadness. At 6:47 a.m., the door opened and an officer led Nathaniel in, handcuffs gleaming on his wrists. He looked disheveled, disoriented, still wearing the pajama pants he'd apparently been sleeping in. His eyes scanned the room, passed over Morrison and Helen, landed on me, and went wide with shock. "Mom," he whispered, his face going white. "But you're dead." "No, Nathaniel," I said quietly. "I'm very much alive. Unlike what you planned for me." He stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. I watched him process it, the realization that I was alive, that his plan had failed, that he'd walked right into a trap of his own making. I don't understand," he finally managed. "Your mother has been in protective custody for the past 2 weeks, Detective Morrison said crisply. "During which time you've committed multiple felonies, all of which we have documented and recorded. Nathaniel Pemberton, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and misappropriation of funds. You have the right to remain silent." As Morrison continued with the Miranda warning, I watched my son's face. I saw the moment it hit him, the full scope of what he'd done, what he'd lost, what he'd become. His knees buckled and officers had to catch him to keep him from falling. "Mom, please," he said, tears streaming down his face. "Please, you have to understand. I was desperate. I didn't mean, I wouldn't have actually." "Yes, you would have," I said, and my voice was steady, clear. "You researched how to do it. You increased my life insurance policy. You set up fake trusts and prepared to sell my house. You created a false death certificate before I was even dead. You would have killed me, Nathaniel. Your own mother. For money. I love you," he sobbed. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "I loved you too," I said. But love isn't enough when the person you love is willing to murder you for an insurance payout. They led him away, still crying, still protesting. Penelope arrived next, perfectly dressed even in custody, her face a mask of cold fury. She didn't look at me, didn't say a word, just stared straight ahead as they processed her. Vanessa was last, and she was different from the other two. She looked smaller somehow, defeated, her confidence stripped away. When she saw me, she actually stopped. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "About the murder part. I swear I didn't know. He told me you'd already died, that he just needed help with some paperwork. I didn't know he was planning to." Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry." I looked at her, this woman who'd been sleeping with my married son, who'd helped him commit fraud even if she hadn't known the full extent of his plan, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sympathy, just emptiness. "You knew enough," I said. "You knew he was married. You knew he was lying to people. You chose to be part of it. They took her away too." Over the next several hours, Marcus Chin walked me through the evidence they'd compiled. It was overwhelming: bank records, emails, phone transcripts, search histories, forged documents. Nathaniel had been planning this for at least 8 months, possibly longer. The affair with Vanessa had started around the same time, and Marcus believed she'd been part of the motivation. Nathaniel had wanted to leave Penelope, marry Vanessa, but he couldn't afford to without my inheritance. "The irony," Marcus said, shaking his head, "is that if he'd just been patient, if he'd been a decent son and waited, he probably would have inherited most of your estate naturally when you died of old age. But he couldn't wait. He wanted it now, wanted to fund his lifestyle, pay off his debts, impress his mistress." "What happens now?" I asked. "They'll be arraigned tomorrow. Bail will be set high, they're all flight risks. Then there'll be a trial, probably in about 6 months. With the evidence we have, Dorothy, they're going to prison. All of them." I visited Margaret that afternoon. She'd been transferred to the care facility as promised, and while she was weaker than before, she was clean, comfortable, and receiving proper pain management for the first time in months. "You did it," she whispered when I took her hand. "You stopped them." "We did it," I corrected. "If you hadn't risked everything to warn me, Maggie, I'd be dead right now. You saved my life." "I'm glad," she said, smiling. "I'm glad I could do one good thing before the end." We sat together in silence for a while, two elderly women who'd survived a lifetime of hardships, who'd found each other again after 50 lost years, who'd faced down death together. "Will you stay?" Margaret asked finally. "Until." "I'll stay," I promised. "I'm not going anywhere." Margaret died 3 weeks later, peacefully in her sleep, with me holding her hand. We buried her in Riverside Cemetery, in a plot next to my husband Robert. She'd been family, the only real family I had left, and she deserved to rest with people who'd loved her. The trial was exactly as devastating as I'd expected. The prosecution laid out the entire conspiracy in meticulous detail: the affair, the financial crimes, the research into methods of murder, the preparation of false documents. Nathaniel's defense tried to argue that he'd never actually harmed me, that planning wasn't the same as doing, but the jury didn't buy it. The evidence was too strong, the intent too clear. On a cold day in November, 8 months after I'd first overheard that conversation in the bedroom, the verdicts came in. Nathaniel, guilty on all counts. Sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and financial crimes. Penelope, guilty of conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse. Sentenced to 8 years. Vanessa, guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud. Sentenced to 3 years and probation. I sat in the courtroom and watched them led away in shackles, and I still didn't feel what I thought I should feel. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just sadness for what could have been, for the son I'd loved who'd turned into a monster, for the life I'd built that had been revealed as a lie. After the trial, I sold my cottage on Willowbrook Lane. Too many memories, too much pain. I couldn't live in a house my son had planned to sell after murdering me. Instead, I bought a small condo in the same complex where Helen Winters lived, and we became close friends, having coffee together every morning, taking walks around Birchwood Lake, volunteering at the hospital together. Marcus Chan helped me restructure my finances, set up proper protections, establish a trust that would eventually go to charities that helped homeless people and cancer patients, a tribute to Margaret. My life insurance policy was cancelled entirely. I didn't need it anymore, and I couldn't bear to have anything associated with Nathaniel's plan. I visited him in prison once, 6 months after his sentencing. He'd lost weight, his expensive suits replaced by prison orange, his confidence replaced by hollow-eyed defeat. "I'm sorry," he said immediately when we sat down across from each other in the visiting room, a thick piece of plexiglass between us. "I know that's not enough, that sorry doesn't even begin to cover what I did, but Mom, I'm so sorry." "Why?" I asked. It was the question that had haunted me for months. "Why did you hate me so much?" "I didn't hate you," he said, and tears started rolling down his face. "I never hated you. I wanted more. More money, more success, more of everything. And you became an obstacle to that. Not a person, not my mother, just an obstacle. Something to get past so I could have what I wanted. When did I stop being your mother and become an obstacle?" He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," he finally whispered. "It happened so gradually I didn't even notice. Every promotion, every success, every dollar I made, it was never enough. I always wanted more. And eventually, more meant your money, your house, your life insurance. I convinced myself I deserved it, that I'd earned it somehow. I stopped seeing you as a person at all. Do you see me now?" He looked at me through the plexiglass, really looked at me, and nodded. "Yes. Now I see you. Now I see what I destroyed. But it's too late, isn't it?" "Yes," I said quietly. "It's too late." I never visited him again. Helen asked me once if I felt guilty about that, about turning my back on my own son. I thought about it carefully before answering. "I spent 70 years being the kind of person who put everyone else first," I told her. "Who sacrificed and gave and loved unconditionally. And my son took all of that and decided it wasn't enough, that he deserved even more, that he deserved everything including my life. I don't feel guilty for surviving, Helen. I don't feel guilty for making sure he faced consequences for trying to murder me. And I don't feel guilty for choosing to spend my remaining years in peace rather than visiting a prison to console a man who planned my death." "Good," Helen said firmly. "You shouldn't." 2 years after the trial, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop in downtown Birchwood Falls, not Lakeside Coffee House. I couldn't bring myself to go there anymore, when a young woman approached my table. "Mrs. Pemberton?" she asked hesitantly. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Sarah Chen, Detective Morrison's daughter. My mom told me your story, and I wanted to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" "I'm in law school," Sarah explained. "I'm going to be a prosecutor. And your case, what you went through, how you fought back, how you survived, it's the reason why. I want to protect people like you. I want to make sure that people like your son face justice." I looked at this bright, earnest young woman, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt something like hope. "That's wonderful, Sarah," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "Sit down. Tell me about your studies." We talked for an hour, and when she left, I sat alone with my coffee and watched the people of Birchwood Falls go about their lives outside the window. Families walking together, couples holding hands, elderly people like me enjoying the autumn sunshine. I was 72 years old. I'd survived cancer twice, the death of my husband, the betrayal of my son, and a plot to murder me. I'd lost almost everything, my family, my innocence, my belief in the fundamental goodness of blood ties. But I'd gained something too. I'd gained the knowledge that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. That I could fight back. That I could survive. And that sometimes, love wasn't enough, that you had to love yourself enough to walk away from people who wanted to destroy you, even if those people were your own children. 3 years after the trial, on a sunny May morning, I stood at Riverside Cemetery next to Margaret's grave. I'd brought fresh flowers, roses, her favorite, and I knelt carefully, my knee no longer bothering me much after physical therapy and regular exercise. "I'm okay, Maggie," I said quietly. "I'm actually okay. You saved my life, and I've tried to make it count. I volunteer at the homeless shelter now, helping women like you who fell through the cracks. I've donated most of my money to causes that matter: cancer research, homeless services, elder abuse prevention. I kept enough to live on, but the rest is going to help people." A breeze rustled through the cemetery trees, carrying the scent of spring flowers and fresh grass. "I think about you often," I continued. "About how brave you were, how you risked everything for someone you hadn't seen in 50 years. You taught me something important, Maggie. You taught me that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up when you need them most, who risk everything to save you, who love you without expecting anything in return." I placed the roses on her grave and stood up slowly, using my cane for balance. "Rest well, cousin," I said. "And thank you for everything." As I walked back to my car, my phone rang. It was Helen, asking if I wanted to join her for lunch and then our weekly visit to the hospital where we volunteered in the cancer ward. I said yes, of course I did, and smiled as I got into my car. My son had tried to erase me, to delete me from the world so he could cash in on my death. But I was still here, still living, still making a difference in the world. I'd been to my own funeral, or rather, I'd been the ghost at a funeral that never happened. I'd watched my son and his accomplices try to profit from a death that hadn't occurred. And in the end, I'd survived. Not just survived, I'd thrived. Because the best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't destroying the people who'd hurt you. It was living well despite them. It was building a new life from the ashes of the old one. It was finding joy and purpose and meaning even after betrayal. As I drove through the streets of Birchwood Falls toward Helen's house, toward lunch and volunteering and another ordinary day in my extraordinary survival, I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. And I realized something that made me smile. They'd tried to make me disappear. But instead, they'd set me free. Epilogue. 5 years after my funeral that never was, I received a letter from Nathaniel. It had been forwarded through several channels. Apparently, his lawyer had contacted Marcus Chin, who'd contacted Helen, who'd finally brought it to me with a questioning look. "You don't have to read it," she said. "You don't owe him anything." "I know," I said. "But I'm curious." The letter was brief. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you. But I wanted you to know that I'm in therapy now, real therapy, not just checking boxes for the parole board. I'm trying to understand how I became the person who could plan his own mother's murder. The answer isn't simple or satisfying. It's a combination of greed, entitlement, desperation, and a complete disconnection from basic human empathy. I convinced myself that money was more important than people, that success was more valuable than love, that I deserved whatever I wanted regardless of who got hurt. I was wrong. About everything. I'll be in prison for another 8 years. When I get out, I'll be almost 60 years old. My law license is gone. My marriage is over. My reputation is destroyed. Everything I worked for, everything I sacrificed you for, is gone. And the worst part is that I deserve it. I deserve all of it and more. I'm not asking for your forgiveness or your understanding. I'm just asking that you know this: I see you now. I see what I had and what I destroyed. I see the mother who loved me unconditionally, who sacrificed everything for me, who deserved so much better than what I gave her. I hope you're happy, Mom. I hope you've built a good life without me in it. You deserve that much, at least. I'm sorry. For everything. Nathaniel. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. What will you do? Helen asked. Nothing, I said. There's nothing to do. He's sorry, and maybe he means it, maybe he doesn't. Either way, it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change who he is or what he did. Will you write back? I thought about it for a long moment, looking out Helen's window at the lake sparkling in the afternoon sun, at the life I'd built in the aftermath of betrayal. No, I said finally. The person he wrote that letter to, the mother he remembers, the woman he tried to kill, she doesn't exist anymore. I'm someone different now. Someone stronger. Someone who knows her worth isn't tied to being loved by people who want to use her. I stood up, dropping the letter in Helen's recycling bin. Come on, I said to my friend. We're going to be late for our volunteer shift, and I promised Mrs. Anderson I'd teach her granddaughter to knit today. As we drove to the hospital, I thought about endings and beginnings, about death and resurrection, about the funeral I'd never had and the life I'd gained instead. They say you can't come back from the dead. But in a way, that's exactly what I'd done. The old Dorothy Pemberton, the one who measured her worth by her son's love, who believed family was everything, who would have sacrificed anything to keep the peace, she had died. And in her place, I'd been born. A woman who knew that survival was sometimes more important than forgiveness, that self-respect mattered more than family loyalty, that living well was the ultimate victory. I'd been to my own funeral and found it empty. But my life? My life was finally, beautifully full. Thank you for following my story to the end. I hope it reminds you that it's never too late to fight back, to reclaim your life, to choose yourself over people who would destroy you, even if they're family. If you've experienced something similar, please share your story in the comments. And remember, you are stronger than you think, braver than you believe, and worthy of so much more than people who see you as disposable. Comment below with your thoughts, and let me know what country you're watching from. Stay strong, stay safe, and never let anyone make you feel like your life doesn't matter.